prophecies, conspiracy theories, and so forth. All of them aim at stirring up emotions, positive or negative. It's a cycle, the Mayan cycle. The Mayan calendar we're talking about doesn't end. That's all a fear game. It's the cycle that ends.
I see no scientific imperative for, nor do I have a personal conviction that would support the prophecy angle, although I have the highest regard for the work of the Mayan astronomers.
This sort of necessary shift in consciousness doesn't just somehow come about on its own. It happens because we work to achieve it.
I am convinced that a change will come about in 2012, but the question is, when is 2012?
Don't panic yet, everyone. June 2012.
That's the date that many doomsday prophets are claiming the world as we know it will end.
I'm convinced that we're heading towards a dramatic change on this planet. Everything we can observe indicates this. Climate change, overpopulation, food shortages. Everything is undergoing an exponential development. And we know that an exponential function climbs even higher until the grade is so steep that the system self-destructs.
The paradigm shift that is already happening, first in physics. Biology is lagging behind, but it's already happening. It's a move towards a more organic view of nature, a more interconnected view of nature, where we see nature, the whole universe, the earth, and living organisms, not as machines.
We're abolishing the word explain. Physicists have discovered that nothing can be explained. You can only describe something within a certain framework, which leads you to certain logical, mathematical conclusions, which are in turn interpreted, and the battle is on.
We are developing our inner senses, that is not our sight. I don't know when. Some people say 2012. It might be.
My understanding is that at that point, all possibilities will be open. All possibilities. To go down to hell forever, or to go up to heaven, or whatever.
When you know that science can't come close to getting a handle on the whole thing, then you know why the press can't report anything serious about it. They only take an interest in what they know, so that the continuity of causality won't be disrupted too much.
(2012). Almost no one is immune to the magnetism of the state. With all the crises and constant outbreak of new conflicts, sinister prophecies fan the fires of apocalyptic angst, while for others, the promise of spiritual renewal gives strength in uncertain times. What bothers me in both scenarios as a scientist is the mood of panic and even hysteria that often gets whipped up. But I do find it remarkable that in many ancient civilizations, this particular year is believed to mark a special turning point. The Maya even refer to it as the final, all-encompassing transition. And that is clearly already well underway, isn't it? We've long since realized that all the current global challenges can only be mastered if we break through established structures and habitual ways of thinking and develop a new awareness. Furthermore, natural scientists are now observing that cosmic influences are having an increasing effect on material, environment, and ourselves, which in turn has a measurable influence on our feelings and perception. We're already in a different state of awareness now, wide awake, than we were when we just woke up only 3, 4, 5, 6 hours ago. It's a different state of being, which has then expanded to become a higher level of consciousness, a level that allows us to perceive everything differently, including the things we've already lived through. The interaction between you and me changes. The physical separation ceases to exist. The idea that you're over there and I'm here and you're something different. It is the ability to perceive the holistic nature of things. I see that as an outcome of this transformation. I myself have spent many years focusing on how to scientifically describe how our bioorganism reacts to terrestrial and cosmic influences. Electromagnetic fields, for example. The real sensation is that it appears these research data could take on an unprecedented significance for humanity in the period right around 2012 of all times. But that's just one side of the coin. Because if our perception changes as dramatically as I suspect is possible, our entire worldview will inevitably be derailed as a result. That's why we should approach everything that happens from here on in with a consciousness of a child, open and unbiased. That will enable us to open up a world in which mathematicians become philosophers and science merges with religion. In this way, we can begin now to overcome the limitations of our consciousness and to breach the boundaries of space and time. To understand why our perception and awareness could soon undergo such a dramatic change, we must first explore a few fundamental questions, namely, what exactly is consciousness? Where is this inexplicable part of our existence located, and what role does our brain play in this context?
And this is one of the most unexplored areas in all of science. It's now one of the most exciting areas. Consciousness studies is a frontier area of science, largely because consciousness itself has been so ignored by scientists for so long. Now, at last, people are looking at this and realizing we know almost nothing about the nature of our own minds and how they relate to our brains. I'm interested in what I call the mysteries of everyday life, things that happen to lots of people, but which science can't explain. One of them is telepathic telephone calls. You think of someone and then they ring, and then you say, "That's funny, I was just thinking about you." More than 80% of people have had that experience in Europe and America. So it's very common. Another area is the feeling of being stared at. You turn around, somebody's looking at you, or you stare at someone, they turn around. Well, I've had these experiences myself, and again, most people have. The sense of being stared at, about 90% of people have had that experience, in a way that seems to be telepathic. So I've done experiments to find out whether it really is telepathic, and yes, indeed, at least in some cases, it seems to be. The conventional view of the materialist theory of the mind, which is still the dominant theory within academic science, says that the mind is the brain. Mental activity is brain activity. all your thoughts, intentions, and so on, are inside your head. What I'm suggesting is they're not all inside your head. They extend beyond your head through fields, which I call morphic fields.
The interesting thing, and yet we've known it for years, but somehow it eluded us, that for about 20 minutes during the acquisition of new information, it's two stages. It's electrical and electromagnetic, and it's physical, chemical. It's energy and matter. And during that 15 to 20 minutes, that pattern that we call experience is transformed into connections of dendrites, spines to connect. And in a lifetime, with all of the energy associated with your thinking, that's just a few joules of energy. That's the thinking now. And the Earth's magnetic field has the capacity to store 10 to the 18th joules, which means that the thought of every person who's ever lived could be there, represented. So all this idea says is that information, not you, not your sense of self, that's a brain phenomenon, but the information is stored extracerebrally.
In quantum theory, we talk about statistics and probabilities, and basically about noise. We have a constant background noise that is simply there. What we do with our brain is to pull information out of this noise. In that sense, anything at all can be found in the noise field. So from out of other space-time or non-space-time areas, these information fields control, non-energetically, the activity here on Earth, with the help of processes that occur in our brains.
Our brain. A package of wonders that we haven't even unpacked yet. It's unfathomable, but the number of possible connections in the brain is greater than the number of all the atoms in the entire universe. We know that various messenger substances known as neurotransmitters are responsible for the exchange of information between nerve cells. Minute electrical impulses prompt the nerve cell to discharge these neurotransmitters, which are made up of different specific molecules according to their particular function. It is these molecules that keep our feelings and our lives in rhythm. They control the sleeping and waking phases of the body and trigger euphoria and depression. So far, so good. But this purely biochemical analysis doesn't explain why our feeling of self-identity develops with the accompanying experiences and intuitive events. This is where biology reaches its limits, and consciousness research becomes the subject of a discipline that has historically focused more than any other on measurable characteristics and immutable laws: physics.
Charon's model of electrons, which postulates that they can store memory information in the form of light patterns, is an obvious thread to follow. The idea is that the electrons that have organized a specific biological organism and control all the biochemical, biophysical processes during its lifetime by means of the electromagnetic fields that they generate, that these electrons, or at least a certain hardcore portion of them, are the substance of what we call the human soul.
The latest findings on quantum physical phenomena could also be the key to understanding the processes in our synapses. To put it another way, thoughts and experiences are processed in a region where the laws of space and time no longer apply or work completely differently. According to this theory, the brain could be the link to a higher, otherworldly dimension.
A good analogy would be something like a cell phone, a handy. In the mobile telephone, there is an electromagnetic field inside the phone, but the field of the phone extends beyond the surface of the phone. It extends over hundreds of meters. And because of that, the phone can have effects at a distance, and it can pick up influences from far away through invisible fields. And I think our minds are like invisible fields that extend beyond our brains. They're not just confined to the inside of the head. If you have a dog and you intend to go home, the dog can pick up that intention even before you get in the car to set off home. And we've done lots of experiments where we film the dog. We have people come home at random times. We have them come home in taxis to rule out familiar car sounds. All these things show that attention and intention can work at a distance. They're not confined to the inside of the head.
Okay, let's go.
Quantum physics has shown us that things are much more interconnected than we previously imagined. I think this more holistic approach is the way science is going and is bound to continue to go.
All schools of philosophy like to use the ocean as a metaphor for the structure of our consciousness. On the surface, we have the wave. The wave can most certainly experience itself as an individual, yeah. Yet when we look at waves, we would never accept the idea that they are isolated entities. Rather, we see them as fluctuations of a larger whole, namely the ocean.
The limitations lie in our brain and in the programming we've had drummed into us from our earliest years. This system carries an immense inertia factor because we keep reproducing it. We continue to educate new generations of children into this system. And the attempts that we do make to expand the boundaries of the system suffer from the following. It's very difficult for me to move from a limited system into a broader or a wider one. It's much easier the other way round. When I imagine a big funnel with the extended system up at the top, then I'm sitting down at the thin end with my limited brain capacity and my limited abilities. And when they throw a big bundle of hay into the opening up there, only a single straw comes out at my end. That's the state of our limitation, and we'll have to live with it and fight it for some time to come.
Eugene Wigner stated that you need to consider consciousness in understanding physics. Sir Arthur Eddington said that physics is the study of consciousness. And as I grew up in the woods in the country in Northern California, I felt that experience of being in tune with all nature, connected with all existence, a harmony and peace. And I think if we realize the power of the influence of our individual thoughts and our responsibilities, one of the outcomes I see is making the world a better place.
The sweeping transformation of consciousness in 2012 must be accompanied by changes within our brain, which would enable us to perceive previously inaccessible stimuli and correlations. But what could possibly have such an effect on our brain? Long before I posed this question, in connection with the events of the year 2012, I had witnessed several clinical experiments in which we studied the effects of electromagnetic fields on the human brain. Test subjects were exposed to such fields which had been created for the purpose. And our tests showed that their brain waves were in fact influenced by the external waves. This is significant because the brain itself works in different frequencies during different phases of consciousness. In other words, the sleeping and waking phases. Current studies confirm that, relative to the strength of the field and frequency level, not only the mood of test persons can be influenced, but their perception, learning ability, and memory as well. Clearly, electromagnetic fields have a decisive influence on our brain function and can rapidly evoke various states of consciousness.
I think one of the most important features to remember about our species, our 7 billion brains that make up the human being as a population, is that we're all immersed within the Earth's magnetic field. And even a simple calculation of magnetic diffusivity, which means the ability to diffuse information, under the appropriate conditions, all brains could be connected within 4 or 5 minutes. Think of every brain as a copper wire, and there are 7 billion of them. What happens if you had a handful of these 7 billion wires and you put a magnetic field through it? You would get a mutual current induced in all of them. And that current, that magnetic field, would reflect the characteristics of all those wires. And the point is, you could apply something from the external field and influence every one of those wires. The Earth vibrates, it resonates electromagnetically in the same ranges as the human brain. And with the right resonance, you could influence all brains and sense information, your experiences of images and thoughts and memories, or resonance and magnetic fields within the brain. The capability is there to influence not only thought, but also memory itself.
So the cause of a revolutionary transformation in our perception could indeed be a colossal electromagnetic field. When astronauts returned from the first manned space flights, experiencing serious health problems, the term space sickness was coined. The cause soon became clear. In their space capsule, the astronauts had been cut off from the Earth's magnetic field. This fact shows with stunning clarity that our Earth's magnetic field does a lot more than just protect us from cosmic radiation. Our entire bioorganism literally harmonizes with this field. It regulates the cycles of life and our body clock, and could even be the engine for many of the metabolic processes, not to mention its significance for the directional sense in both humans and animals.
The geomagnetic field is a stable or a stationary field, kind of like a refrigerator magnet, right? If you take a magnet, that field's always there. So the strength of the field isn't really changing much, at least not in terms of our day-to-day. But what does change daily and affects us is those field lines. If you think of the Earth here, and you've got these magnetic field lines going thousands of miles out into space all around the planet, as they interact with the solar wind, they vibrate. Okay, so the solar wind plucks the field lines, very much like a guitar string. The Schumann resonances are determined by a resonant cavity between the surface of the Earth and basically the bottom of the ionosphere. So when magnetic waves get established in this cavity, those that are resonant with the resonant frequency of the cavity become globally propagating standing waves. And there are 8 primary Schumann resonances. The first one is 7.8 hertz, and that's very close to what's called the alpha rhythm in our brain waves. It turns out all 8 of these primary Schumann resonances have overlaps with human brain waves.
Of course, we cannot perceive the geomagnetic field directly with our 5 senses, yet we do have the antennas for it. We have at our disposal more than 5 million magnetite crystals per gram of brain mass. They react extremely sensitively to all the magnetic fields in our environment, and very significantly to sudden change.
When there is a magnetic storms, these magnetic storms can play havoc with satellites, communication satellites, for instance. This has been the reason why there have been some blackouts. Now, if you look at what is the physiology of an individual, well, the heart is a very big electrical circuit. It's a big pump. The brain also has electrical activity, so there is no reason to believe that they will act any differently from the grid or the satellites when they are hit by a magnetic storm.
Statistical evaluations are in fact making it clear that disruptions in the geomagnetic field are reflected in just about all areas of life. Birth rate, industrial accidents, death statistics, traffic accidents. The numbers are always way above average on days when extreme geomagnetic activity is recorded. A study commissioned by the U.S. Federal Reserve concluded that even trade on the international stock exchanges is influenced directly by the activity of the geomagnetic field. It now appears certain the geomagnetic field seems to have a decisive effect on our psyche and our biorhythms. What does that mean in relation to the year 2012 and beyond? For the biophysical and chemical processes in our brain to change in the way that we have observed in our experiments with artificial fields, very dramatic geomagnetic turbulence would have to occur around this time. Is a calculable, perhaps cyclical event actually due to take place that will have an effect on our planet? We know now that in the history of the Earth, there have been regular incidences of extreme changes to the magnetic field. These things appear to be due to regular cosmic cycles, comparable to the 4 seasons. At this point in the discussion, the Mayan calendar must inevitably enter the equation. According to their calculations, our year 2012 is so special precisely because this is when various cycles end and also begin. It's comparable to a clock face. Once every 12 hours, all 3 hands point to 12 for the short duration of 1 second. So let's take a closer look at the cosmic cycles known today. We are made aware of them most consciously by the alternation of day and night, caused by the rotation of the Earth on its own axis. Indisputably, the most self-evident of all cycles. Just as obvious is the unit of the month. Our moon orbits the Earth once in exactly 28 days. We can clearly observe this in the various moon phases. Our Earth takes 365 days for its journey around the Sun. In other words, 1 year. The sequence of 4 seasons arises over the course of the one cycle due to the slight tilt of our Earth on its axis. The hemisphere tilted towards the Sun is somewhat warmer because the Sun's rays hit it at a sharper angle, and also because the days are significantly longer there than the nights. In this hemisphere, it's summer. But our Earth's axis doesn't always tilt in the same direction. A cycle that can only be observed over millennia is the precession of the equinoxes, also known as a Platonic year. Our Earth wobbles like a slow-spinning top, and it takes around 26,000 years until the Earth's axis tilts in the same direction again. All of these processes, which we can confirm with ultra-modern instruments at best, were already well known to the Maya and form the basis of their cyclical calendar. Thanks to this knowledge, they were able to give each day for centuries ahead its own individual name. That's very important when you assume, as did the Maya, that each day comes with its own particular quality due to the exact cosmic constellation. But returning to the subject of cosmic cycles. Our entire planetary system orbits around the center of our galaxy over an unimaginably long period of time. At the same time, it also oscillates around the galactic equator. In this case, too, the length of time it takes for our planetary system to complete one cycle of rising and sinking is virtually unfathomable in human terms. According to the Mayan calendar, the perfect depiction of cosmic cycles, many such significant cycles are expected to begin to dovetail dramatically in the year 2012, resulting in a constellation so unusual that it will lead to global changes and the much-discussed higher vibrational level. However, there's almost nothing we can deduce with certainty from the cycles known to us today. Even though some current measurements do seem to support such prophecies, increases in cosmic radiation over many years, for example, the time frame and distance in question are still far too vast to enable us to pin these events down to a certain year, let alone an exact day. And it's completely unnecessary for us to rely on speculation, because what is presumably the most significant source of geomagnetic disturbances, in the cosmic sense as well, is glaringly obvious. It is a tiny cog in the wheel of cosmic cycles, yet powerful enough to cause devastating economic and material damage on our planet. And the little cog is our sun.
Vehicle on an international mission of solar physics.
Roll program is in. Vehicle responses look good at this time.
Listening now to Skip Mackey and Central Telemetry here at the Mission Director Center.
In December 1995, NASA and ESA launched the SOHO satellite into space. SOHO, which stands for Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, has since then sent us a steady stream of measurement data from the sun. In 2006, a new era of solar observation quality was ushered in with the dual satellites called stereo. These two satellites observe the sun simultaneously from different angles. Like a giant pair of human eyes, the stereo mission gives us an unprecedented spatial view of our central celestial body. The research focuses on the observation of explosions on the sun's surface. These solar flares, or eruptions, catapult high-energy charge carriers into space at speeds of several million kilometers per hour.
A coronal mass ejection is the violent expulsion of a part of the solar atmosphere that contains both magnetic field and plasma.
Our Earth's magnetic field protects us from these particles, diverting them into a detour around the globe. This causes an effect which we can observe at both of the Earth's poles, known as the Northern Lights. But behind what we experience as a spectacular show of nature lurks an unpleasant shadow.
They can really disrupt satellite communications. They can affect GPS signals, our cell phones. They can even induce a lot of currents in the northern latitudes and even cause electricity disruptions.
The probability of what's called a solar superstorm is especially high in the next few years. NASA's solar researchers have classified the maximum solar activity expected during this time period as so dangerous that in 2009 they began to issue official warnings about its possible effects. Just stirring up panic? Statistics show a clear parallel at all times between population rates on Earth and sunspot activity. A further indication of the strong corollary between the reactions of our climate and all biological life on Earth to solar cycles.
There is a bulk of supporting evidence making a whole story consistent. And that is very important because every cycle that we map, every effect that you find that may be associated with solar activity or other cycles that exist in our environment, they are always substantiated on the basis of statistical analysis.
What that means is that there is a direct relationship between the mood measure, the self-rated mood, and cosmological variables, both the solar wind speed and the antipodal geomagnetic disturbance index.
And another thing. On the morning of September 1st, 1859, British astronomer and sun researcher Richard Carrington happened, by coincidence, to observe a blazing explosion on the surface of the sun. He knew at once that he had witnessed a very special event. In the nights that followed, brilliant northern lights could be seen all over the globe, as far from the poles as Hawaii and Jamaica. This particularly severe magnetic storm disabled the telegraph network worldwide and caused the paper in the teletype machines to burst into flames. That was 1859. For our modern, high-tech world, a solar superstorm would doubtless deal a heavy blow. Power outages and the resulting disruption of supply chains, governments the world over are preparing more or less for such a scenario. But the possible effects on our bioorganism have largely been ignored thus far. Should we take the ancient prophecies of a quantum leap in consciousness seriously, after all? And not so much in terms of mystic or spiritual parameters, but quite pragmatically, from a biochemical, biophysical standpoint. This is underscored by a simple example. Imagine that someone were to give you, without your knowledge, a consciousness-expanding drug. As soon as the substance takes effect, you would begin to believe you were losing your mind, because you would start to feel and perceive things that are not part of reality as you know it. If, on the other hand, you were to take the drug on purpose, fully aware of its effect, it would not take you by surprise. You would be prepared for it and able to make sense of the effect. One step at a time. Our brain, as the interface to our consciousness, is also a high-performance filter. The sensory organs deliver around 1 million times more information to the brain then it passes on to our consciousness. Our brain decides how relevant a particular sensory impression is for our survival. According to this prioritizing, we are then either able to perceive it or not. Tranquilizers allow only the strongest stimuli to reach our consciousness perception. Some psychoactive substances have just the opposite effect. Cannabis, for example, disrupts the ability of the visual system to block out superfluous views of the surroundings. But hallucinations, such as those induced by hashish consumption, are not delusions. Rather, they are hyper-realistic, uncensored images one after the other, just as our brain constantly registers them, but without forwarding them on to our consciousness. LSD is another drug known for its consciousness-expanding effects. Under the influence of LSD, the ability to perceive time and space is lost within just a few seconds.
Structure dictates function. All experiences come from brain function. And those experiences are due to the structure of the brain and the electrical patterns associated with it. You can imitate it by giving a psychotropic drug, for example, or you can imitate it by exposing the brain to the appropriate intensity, temporally patterned magnetic field. For every molecular pattern, called chemicals, there is an electromagnetic sequence or temporal pattern that must be matched. And when you apply that to the brain, you should get comparable experiences, and that's what we have found.
The human brain produces a neurotransmitter, a molecule very similar to LSD. It's called dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. It seems that even the tiniest amount of these molecules can trigger hallucinations in sensitive individuals. Various experiments have also shown that exposure to certain electromagnetic fields and frequencies can stimulate the brain to release DMT molecules. Such fields have the same strength and frequencies as what we might be exposed to during severe geomagnetic storms. Is it not plausible that our brain is already equipped with all the prerequisites for an expanded consciousness? And that this, let's call it function, need only be activated by the release of certain messenger substances, such as DMT, molecules that weaken the limitations on our perception, or even dissolve them altogether? It is as though we will be shown things the way they really are for the first time. To use a metaphor, our blinders will be removed. This is how we think of outer space. Innumerable spots of light in a sea of endless black emptiness. But we have known for some time now that this infinite vastness isn't so empty after all. It must contain something that we can neither see nor measure, because the familiar visible material phenomena alone cannot explain the movements of the stars and galaxies. And this dark matter must be omnipresent. Its particles permeate our planet and us without leaving a single trace. We still have only vague suspicions about the nature of this phenomenon. There are a multitude of things that we now know must exist, although they lie beyond the realm of direct measurement and observation.
The fact of the matter is that our mental functioning can now be demonstrated in a new language, the language of frequencies, to be dependent upon unseen effects of our environment, gravitation, magnetism, many things we cannot see.
According to astrophysics, dark matter and dark energy that are both invisible assume almost 95% of the entire mass. So what is visible is just 4-5%. The 4-5% are what we call atoms. So very few. We don't see anything at all.
We call it dark matter because we can't see it. But it reveals itself through its gravitational interactions with ordinary matter, which is what we can observe with telescopes. When one piece of dark matter meets another piece of dark matter, they may annihilate each other and produce gamma rays. And so what we're going to look for are the gamma rays from that dark matter annihilation.
If you look at me in X-ray, I'm not like this. I'm a skeleton. If you look at me in infrared rays, I am like a cloud. So visibility strictly depends on the wavelength, on the frequency we are observing.
When you look up in the optical sky, it looks very quiescent and stable and nothing changing with time. When you look at the gamma ray sky, you realize that there are violent phenomena in the universe that evolve very quickly. Gamma ray bursts being an example, something that for a brief instant of time, about a second, outshines the entire rest of the universe.
Do we really see the world as it truly is? Those familiar with the Mayan material will at this point be reminded of the galactic synchronization ray, which, it is thought, will raise our vibrational level around 2012.
The very fact is that we are blind. And in my view, what is going to occur that our blindness collapse. Obviously, this is a radical change of everything, but it regards our perception. It doesn't regard a distraction of the world. Our mind that is only linked to the electromagnetic field, and scientists do prove this, will collapse. But we will not die, because we are not our mind, we are much more. So we will not see with our eyes, but we will see or feel with our bodies, because we have inner senses. And this is what is going on. We are developing our inner senses.
We are being prepared to accept the fact that evolution doesn't stop with our genetic code, that we are in a unique position to update and to prepare ourselves really for work in what we will call a fifth and sixth dimensional area of genetic steering.
But how would we react if we were suddenly flooded with millions of new stimuli? If perceptions were to penetrate our consciousness that we are unable to classify because we've never experienced them?
Look, how could someone, let's say 300 or 400 years ago here in Western Europe, possibly imagine the room we are sitting in now with all its equipment? It's just absurd. It's not possible. There have been one or two people, big names, who have had precognitive visions of inventions, yes. But an exact image of us sitting here receiving pictures from America, that film material is being shot, that will then be available in some modified form or other to hundreds of thousands or millions of people. That's unimaginable. I think that's the same position we're in now.
I think that there's so many possibilities. I think that sometimes the limits are the limits of our imagination. Lord Kelvin suggested that in 1899 no one go into physics because it was discovering one more decimal place. In the first case, I don't think Billy Gates and a lot of people like Tesla and Edison and others noticed that everything had been invented. Man, were they wrong. 747s and everything.
The whole focus of scientific work is to communicate certainties. Not truths, certainties. People feel safe within certainties.
In Gewissheiten fühlt man sich sicher.
I was always struck by the Romans at the end of their empire when they said, if the Vandals come and destroy and attack us, it will be the end of civilization. Well, I mean, you look back now and you say, what kind of horrible civilization did they have, really? Thank God the Vandals came and wiped them out. Otherwise, who would want to be stuck in that mindset? You know, it was horrible. It's the same now. We're so, oh my God, if something happens, we'll lose our civilization. What civilization have we got now to crow about, you know?
Without a doubt, our economic and social systems are coming apart at the seams. We debate daily about environmental protection and the necessity of doing away with hunger and poverty in the world, but we're going in circles, trying to protect the environment and using up more resources in the process, helping the poor and hindering them at the same time from escaping poverty on their own initiative. All the while, our instinct tells us that nothing can change as long as our worldview stays the same. So we need ever more new solutions for problems that were the result of solutions to other problems in the first place. We've never really learned to let go and recognize the causes.
All our belief systems were very, very restrictive. All the church had the power of death, life and death and so on. Science was supposed to be our saving grace, and it's becoming very dogmatic as well now in a similar way. And the application of science are seriously dangerous. So we've got all this to come out of, you know, and people think this is all there is, and they're used to be constricted.
Physicists talk about a final theory of everything. Whenever you think you know everything, you're in for a rude awakening. And I think that the glory of it all is that we don't know everything, and it's wonderful because in our discoveries we have the possibility of not only creating a more utopian society, but getting in touch with how we can have peace, love, and joy instead of war, crime, and violence.
And it's going to be very difficult for a lot of people to just suddenly let go of that and be free and be able to function in a different reality. They won't want to, probably, most of them, a lot of them won't want to.
The major impedance to this is science. Science has become very narrow, very restricted, and the fact that there could be new phenomena that we haven't imagined, is a very difficult thing for many contemporary scientists to understand or appreciate or even accept.
It's just a matter of time because the younger generations are more open than the older ones. As Max Planck said, for such paradigm shifts to occur, you have to wait until old ones die out for the young ones to do things differently.
Dealing with the cosmos and ourselves means dealing with our problems. So when we discuss cancer or high blood pressure or strokes, we are discussing the cosmos as much as we discuss medicine or health. It is the best way to discuss the effect of the cosmos. It is the only way I know of that can change us from the tunnel vision prevailing today at the government agencies who are worried about blackouts, who are worried about electronic engineering, and forget about the effect upon ourselves.
Biologists don't meet physicists, and physicists don't meet biologists, don't meet physicians, and so on. Sheldrake rightly speaks about a life field, and he calls morphogenetic field. It's right, but I say that the same field he called morphogenetic is what physicists call electroweak.
Belief is very limiting. It limits you because you begin to think that what you believe in is the only thing that can exist. And that's not true. So belief is limiting. Beyond belief is liberating, but it's very difficult to achieve because we need security. We need, like you say, nuts and bolts. We need to flesh it out. We need to see something solid. Beyond belief, you are actually in a position where every possibility is open.
How open are we really for something we don't believe in? Yes, there are several good examples of events that we simply ignore because of our ingrained convictions, although we can perceive them with all the senses available to us today, even measure and photograph them. We refuse to admit that they have any relevance for our modern, clued-in life.
It's the same with consciousness research. We suspect that it's beyond our capacity, so we won't even touch it. You'll just earn yourself a bad name among colleagues.
After many discussions such as these, I came to the conclusion that what we now call paranormal is probably just the tip of an iceberg. Excerpts and messengers from a world that we can't yet perceive or understand in the slightest. One faction of physicists is still busy trying to bring the many surprising and unexplained characteristics of elementary particles into harmony with established laws and standard models. But some of their colleagues have long since left these limitations behind, and in the process discovered a world in which mathematics and natural sciences can indeed describe much that has previously been the exclusive prerogative of religion and philosophy. The only bitter pill? These theories are so far away from everything we've learned thus far that now, well, before we attempt this little excursion into the world of new physics, you should try to free your consciousness completely, at least temporarily, from everything you've learned up until today. At the end of the last century, someone discovered a way of getting a scientific grasp on eternity. Physicist Burkhard Heim developed a theory that made it possible to observe the world holistically with all its material and non-material processes. postulating a 12-dimensional worldview, he succeeded not just philosophically, but in a mathematically calculable model in uniting the two aspects of life that have been dogmatically separated for centuries: matter and spirit. But how can we imagine a 12-dimensional world? Let's say that our life as we know it all takes place in a computer. We are all characters in a virtual 3-dimensional reality, a computer game, for example. Everything around us, colors, forms, objects, is 3-dimensional. All sequences and variations are programmed in a single time ray. As long as we don't interrupt the game, time passes in the linear fashion we are familiar with from our reality. Einstein called this virtual environment with 4 dimensions, including time, the space-time continuum. It is the world of our conscious experience. Burkhard Heim combined these dimensions in one space, or Raum in German, called R4. Remember, we're still talking about a computer here, so for anything at all to happen, we first need an operating system, the prerequisite for running any program. In Heim's model, the equivalent of the operating system would be what he calls structured space. X5 and X6 is what he calls the 2 dimensions that comprise structured space. Here, space and time already cease to play a role. Now, everyone would agree that without an operating system, the computer would be worthless. We wouldn't be able to play our game, in other words, to live our virtual world. For that, the computer needs additional data, the program itself, as well as numerous files, in which the visual appearance and the laws of our virtual world are pre-assigned and configured. All this information can be accessed at any time in the operating system's root directories. In Heim's model, these are the information spaces comprised of the dimensions X7 and X8. And finally, the computer itself has to be located somewhere too. It accounts for dimensions X9 to X12. In our model, this space is designation G4. It is the realm of the Creator, the omnipresent higher consciousness, the source of mystery, and the fundamental essence behind man's search for meaning and purpose in this world. Take evolution. It too is a theory that cannot be proven, but we have basically internalized it as a fact. I try to imagine how different our modern rational world would be if the theory of a certain Burkhard Heim were just as embedded in our collective certainty. One thing that is certain: cosmic evolution tends to take full advantage of the ever-changing balance between chaos and order. Nature, in its goal to create ever more complex life forms, has already led us to the edge of extinction 5 times. On its journey through the galaxy, our solar system routinely passes through areas known for their particularly intense cosmic activity. This activity influences our climate and plays a significant role in the developmental process of all affected life forms. So let's take a closer look at this life-changing phenomenon. The state-of-the-art in earthquake prediction recently identified gravitational waves and gamma rays emerging from our sun and from the center of our galaxy, which appear to have a direct correlation to recent global seismic activity. Evidence traces their origin to a region known as Sagittarius A, and the latest radio astronomy findings reveal at its center a supermassive black hole with a mass equal to 4 million of our suns. But the cause of our current cosmic extremes appears to be a gigantic plasma cloud moving in the direction of Sagittarius A. Since 2004, this plasma cloud has almost doubled its speed of approach. The gravitational pull of the black hole has also increased and begun to elongate its shape. Astrophysicists speak of a vacuum process, which according to some calculations will continue until mid-2013, after which it will have reached its maximum. Eventually, the ever-increasing gravitational force of the black hole will consume the plasma cloud. And in that moment, just before the final remnants are pulled in, they reach such extremely high temperatures that astrophysicists expect an eruption at Sagittarius A that will send a massive wave of cosmic rays surging in our direction. Along with gravitational waves, we can expect highly charged X-rays, gamma rays, and radio waves to collide with Earth, causing potentially unforetold energetic effects. Radio waves in particular have an effect upon biological systems that is often underestimated. Our human DNA has a resonance frequency of 150 megahertz. In this frequency range, even the slightest field strengths are enough to produce biophysical effects. They can cause mood changes, and they trigger altered states of consciousness. Reference measurements have shown that the 150 megahertz high-frequency wave in particular activates production of our own internal psychoactive substances. One gland in the brain in particular, the pineal gland, is one of the most powerful producers of such substances in the human body. The pineal gland is also hypersensitive when it comes to external magnetic fields and radio waves. It could, for example, act as an excellent transmitter and receiver of cosmic signals. In 1972, Nobel Prize winner Julius Axelrod discovered that the human pineal gland naturally produces one particularly potent psychoactive substance, originally called telepathine, due to its enhancement of psychic abilities, dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. Some refer to it as the spirit molecule.
One of the interesting things about DMT is it's actively transported into the brain across the blood-brain barrier. It's as if the brain requires DMT for normal function, which is a strange idea. DMT, seems like a building block, for our perception of everyday reality. If that's everyday reality, that just isn't some future, like apocalyptic time. It's almost as if, we're all, kind of living in an apocalyptic time right now because it's being, mediated by some, chemical substance, which, kind of is, kind of holding things together. If you think about, consciousness as occurring within the brain, and if you think about, the brain as the organ of consciousness, I began to think about the prospect of DMT changing brain chemistry and then the capacity of consciousness to experience other levels of reality then would occur. It was almost like the notion of a television receiver. You can change channels. And, some of the channels are everyday reality, and other channels, seem to be specific, to the DMT experience.
When you have a geomagnetic storm, you can get microstructural changes within the brain tissue itself. Now, if you change structure, you change function, which means the entire species, in fact, every living thing on this planet could be altered. The other important thing to remember is that how much of a change in the gene is required to alter the structure of the human brain. You realize a single point mutation, that's one small position, that DNA of that 3 billion base pairs that make up our genome. One small change, and you lose your ability for language. Now let's turn it around. Just suppose that famous event, whatever it was, when all cultures begin to use language more or less at the same time, was because of a point mutation that spread throughout our species. What would have done it? It had to be something that would have united all of us, something to which every human being was exposed, and that's the Earth's magnetic field. You look historically, you'll find that these massive global changes in what we call revitalization movements or revival movements or feelings where there's massive movements of an idea often occur during periods of certain kinds of geomagnetic activity. Remember, for the human brain, it's not the amount, it's the quality. It's the pattern. Sooner or later, we will have a geomagnetic storm that has that appropriate pattern that will influence large portions of individuals who will see all kinds of things, perceive all kinds of phenomena that are remarkably similar. Modern science tends to feel somewhat uncomfortable when you make the assumption that all of us belong to the same species and we're all exposed to the same environment, and that global changes could influence us all simultaneously and influence the direction of history. That takes away this sense of human control over their destiny. It's an anxiogenic idea, anxiety-producing idea to many people, but I think the data indicate that's probably correct.
So it's conceivable, then, that an increase in our consciousness, sparked by this kind of grand celestial event, could provide us with a direct cognition of the hyper-real state of existence. Heraclitus proclaimed that there are 3 states of being. Man is aware of only 2, the sleeping and waking states. The state of full consciousness, however, still remains elusive.
When you start to think about spaces which are most of the time invisible, that starts to kind of, that begins, to move into concepts of spirituality. If you think about spirituality in a way as, the science of invisible things, metaphysics, as it were, you can overlap between spiritual worldviews and some of the worldviews that are coming out of contemporary physics. One of the reasons that I ended up, calling my book The Spirit Molecule is, because I began, to conceive of the DMT state as a spiritual one. And that DMT is a mediator, as it were, between the physical and the incorporeal, the material and the spiritual.
We biological life forms basically have free access to a 3-dimensional space. But it appears the layers above that, the hyperspaces, can be accessed only with phase changes to a higher consciousness. That's the threshold on which humankind is now poised.
We as a humanity occupy a consciousness reality that can be changed. And as we begin to use positive energy and creativity, we open up sides of the human psyche known as the left and right hemisphere, one which is highly scientific and one which is highly multidimensional. We discover that we are multidimensional beings.
4-dimensional space-time continuum, as Albert Einstein basically introduced it into modern physics, won't do it for us. It doesn't account for all particle characteristics.
This is the great transit of our mind from a 3-dimensional space to a hyperdimensional space. And the other huge passage is from one only time, from past to future, to many multiple times.
We're putting forth the concept that we exist in a consciousness field. The consciousness of our thoughts are not limited to our brain. And when you start understanding that, you realize that not only can we affect things going on around the globe, but we can also receive information that comes from outside the local sphere. And we've been able to play with not only space, but also time, where you can go forwards and also reverse.
So from linear time to a multiple, many dimensional times. And this is why we are going to the end of times, that is actually the beginning of eternity, in my view.
What we're now seeing is that today's modern physics is possibly laying the scientific foundation for the spiritual experiences that people have been reporting for hundreds and thousands of years.
All paranormal phenomena, in fact, can be explained using this model. Just one example is psychokinesis. Uri Geller can bend spoons. Everyone knows that. So we have to say he's not quite normal, because normal is what the majority can do and does. But in his case, the channels that access the brain from out of these trans-dimensions, the higher levels, aren't completely leak-proof. They're not quite solid. In this case, the will can bypass the cortex and reach directly into this other space. So I can imagine that there are some people, and this is said to be so, who have dissolved certain barriers. These are the people we call mediums, those who can see into the other side. Parapsychological studies have shown that when you get a group of mediums together, they all see the same thing. In that scenario, those of us without medial abilities, I don't have them, are the anormal ones. The mediums are normal because they're in the majority, and they can see things I can't see.
To actually experience this level, we have to be able to cross over or transcend the level of our normal waking or quotidian consciousness.
When you're speaking about these huge, large-scale, celestial events, to the extent, that they do impact the formation of, DMT, it's interesting to think about, what that world would look like. If every organism which contained the DMT synthesizing gene were flooded with high levels of DMT, the implication is that all those organisms would be entering into the DMT state.
What would DMT look like? What if we took a look into a clinical study group testing its effects? This may provide some clues as to what one could expect.
So as a result of getting an injection of a high dose of DMT, the effects began almost immediately, within a couple of heartbeats. And then there's this buildup of internal pressure and a sound, which also is building up in intensity. There's a display of moving, morphing, buzzing kaleidoscopic patterns which build and build.
Start moving consciously in space and time because things suddenly start coming by at a very, very high velocity.
Then within about the space of a minute, maybe even less, a lot of people, or the majority of people, experienced a separation of their consciousness. And it was almost as if this was a requirement because of the intensity of the pressure that was building up in people.
And I'm now whizzing through this sucker like if it was nothing. I'm flying through it.
So after there was that experience of the separation of the body and consciousness, the consciousness of the volunteers entered into this intensely, saturated, bright world of light.
I remember entering what I called the Logos. And I knew when I entered into this is like the actual core of where all of reality is emanating from. This is where meaning comes from. As soon as I went into it, I lost any sense of being.
different. Any sense of what I was doing, past, any sense of future. It was absolutely blissful.
It was often inhabited by some kind of, sentient beings. They were humanoid or even looked human or mechanical or plant-like, all manner of, living kinds of creatures.
These entities were very clear that they knew me, that they had knowledge of me before I was out there. I knew in my intellectual awareness that this was a very advanced civilization.
Oftentimes, these beings expected the volunteers. They were glad that the volunteers had stumbled upon that technology to be able to interact with them for the first time.
I was free to just be the essence of a soul, and it was ecstasy. And then God talked to me.
A number of the volunteers felt as if they were returning to some place they had been to before but hadn't remembered it up until that point.
The first thought I had was, this is exactly like the last time.
So there was an exchange that occurred between the consciousness of the volunteer and the perceived entities in that state. It would be an exchange of information, psychological insights, sometimes future predictions. There could be emotional exchanges as well.
You are really just experiencing the meaning of life, or what life is, or the gift of life. It's given to you that this is the most beautiful and precious thing that there possibly is.
Also, there is a curious experience of, time stopping, as it were. Most people were astonished at the fact that only 3 or 4 or even 10 minutes had passed by.
I was gone for 15 minutes. 1,000 years of experience in 15 minutes.
If you have a dream, when you wake up, you know that it was a dream. When you come back from DMT, you don't have the feeling that what happened to you wasn't real. You know it was real. You were there. It was absolutely as real as anything that is in the material existence in everyday life.
Something like the electromagnetic field. It is there. It is vibrating. It's all around us. It's invisible. It affects us a little bit. And also, we can affect it a lot.
The experiences seemed, more real than real, which really called into question, is this just purely the brain chemistry changing? Because, if that were the case, that would call into question, the reality, basis of everyday reality. Is there some kind of reality meter or organ in the brain which is responsible for establishing that, sense of reality? And, then you start to chase your tail. You start thinking, well, if it feels on DMT more real than everyday reality, then what is, the hallucination? Or, what's the vision? Is it this everyday reality, or is it what is, going on in the DMT state? So considering, DMT as a spirit molecule, it is a spirit molecule because it is capable of providing the interface between the physical and the spiritual.
The global coherence monitoring stations are basically extremely sensitive magnetic field detectors
that are specifically designed to measure the resonant frequencies in the Schumann resonances, but also the structural field line resonances, which are a much lower frequency and even lower frequency rhythms. Ancient societies, certainly the Aztecs and Mayans and ancient Chinese and even modern Chinese, as far as that goes, have really understood and felt that humanity was affected by the sun. And the first that I know of that really proved this was a Russian astrophysicist, Alexander Chesovsky. He went back to 1749 and very impressive, actually, kind of a study of human history, of major human events. He created this data where he each year plotted the number of major human events. Okay, this major event could be the start of a war, a revolution, something that had a major impact on a global level, positive and negative. And just plotted those yearly, and then plotted the solar cycle. And when you look at this data, it's just, you don't need to do fancy statistics or anything. It's obvious that human affairs are profoundly affected by these events. It's been a lot of work on how the external environment, especially the geomagnetic environment, interacts with and affects physiology. So, for example, we know that our heart rate, literal heart rate, heart rhythms, and so on, in some degrees are actually synchronized to these external magnetic rhythms. Okay, hormones, many things are affected. But of all the systems so far that have been studied, it's the rhythm of the heart that's most sensitive to and reflects changes in the Earth's geomagnetic system. We're suggesting that it's a two-way street, that not only are we affected by these planetary fields, but that humanity, we're all radiating these magnetic fields and interact with them. All of us collectively kind of create a planetary collective consciousness. That's really what each individual is doing. It's the collection of that globally that really determines the planetary consciousness field. This is really hopeful for a lot of people, because for a lot of us, we can think, God, it's a big world, 7 billion people. How am I going to affect that? But what we're talking about here, we all contribute equally. It doesn't matter how much money you make, what your station in life is, any of these things. What we're radiating into the global field environment counts the same. The rhythms in the cardiovascular system are almost an exact match for the rhythms when we look at the field line resonances. So there's, when you have resonances, resonant frequencies between two different systems, there's basic physics that energy and information can easily transfer. And then we look at the brainwave activity, that's in the same region as the Schumann resonances. So there again, there's a potential for energy and information to transfer.
Well, one of the interesting things about the fact that the Earth's magnetic field is about a half a Gauss, or about 10 to the 5th Tesla, is that energy is stored in any area where there's a magnetic field, and you can calculate it. If you take the volume of a cell, one of the 10 trillion cells that make up your body, the energy in it is equal to the energy associated with the wavelength of visible light. And now we know, actually by measurement, we can actually measure this now, that cells give off light when they're distressed, when they communicate. That's right, photons. You can't see it with the naked eye, you need a photomultiplier tube. But it seems to be a primary means of communication. And when you have light being generated, you have access to information from the universe itself.
It's important to understand that the emotions that we experience, the emotional system, is very high in the hierarchy of what controls our physiology. So it's really the emotions we experience that drive a lot of the activity in our nervous system, in our hormonal systems, and so on. The great poets and religions that have been talking about the heart as the source of wisdom and intuition have been right all along. But it's really that access to those intuitive capacities. So it's another, I like to think of as another dimension of intelligence, to be able to really live more from our intuition or our higher capacities, more of that intelligence. And that's really what, from my perspective, the planetary shift that we're going through is all about. It's an increase in consciousness. There's the physical heart that acts as a pump, but it's really much more than a pump even physically. But then there's also what's called the energetic heart, or the spiritual heart. And that's what's really talked about in terms of being that primary connection to our higher capacities.
Looking back at the past, we see that in thousands of years, no system has managed to bring us into a, let's say, more socially cohesive structure. Whether we're talking about laws or religion or all sorts of worldviews, nothing has ever really worked. It's not about applying pressure from outside, telling people, you have to do this, just realize it already. But it is a process of realization. It isn't just about suspecting and believing and hoping. In that sense, to perceive what really is means to realize that we are, in fact, all one.
We used to think there was a division between matter and energy. In fact, people used to think there's a division between mind and body, between spirit and mass. Now we realize that when we talk about spirit, sometimes a four-letter word to many, we're really talking about really, really small energies that are quite quantifiable.
We actually destroyed everything for our children. Is that civilization? Why are we hanging on to it?
Climate change, overpopulation, food shortages, economic problems, natural resources plundered, and on and on. Many things are way out of balance, and these developments all seem exponential.
And what humans don't typically do well with is we don't like change, especially unexpected change.
I don't think we can go ahead at that speed with the old system. We will burn to a frazzle.
You know, you say, well, that's pretty negative and it's very doomsday. Not really. Human beings are remarkably resourceful. When we're anxious, we do a lot of positive things.
Margaret Mead said, it only takes a few good people with a like vision to change the model of what people believe. And I actually don't think it takes that many, but they have to be coherent.
We are developing our inner senses, that is not our sight.
Every time you have an active solar cycle, which we're going into now, there is an effect on our brain waves, but there may be deeper effects. And so the anticipation of the Mayan 2012 might be very good because we may be anticipating and that way creating a new reality.
The direct relationship between the size of the universe, the diameter of the proton, and man's range of vision is part of a larger mass-energy space-time transformation, which involves changes in our basic concepts of the known universe. And so this is really the beginning of a whole new understanding of consciousness physics.
Some people say 2012. It might be.
At that point, all possibilities will be open, good and bad.
Yes, we have to think it's possible. People won't try to build something they think is impossible.
The key point is that there is not only one future. There will be many futures, as well as there is not only one past, but there are many pasts. The present is the moment in which we can choose. I choose freedom.
And the way that I think of this is it's an energetic influx. And we really have the choice of how we're going to process that energy. When we talk about 2012, one of my main messages is that, yeah, these cycles are real, these external cycles, but it's also the greatest periods of human flourishing during these same cycles, not just the negative stuff. But I also believe we are at a special time in history now, so it's a great opportunity we have to create more collaborations, to really access more of our heart intuition. It's a great time to be more aligned, to create more caring relationships, find more creativity, to really solve these problems as we're going through the shift, to learn how to access more of that intuition I was talking about, to become self-responsible and use it in very positive ways.
The word has fallen into disrepute, yet the world is awash with it. The word, of course, is love.
Love is the most powerful force of the nature. So why scientists don't find love? They use means through which they cannot discover this force, because they use artificial instruments that don't feel love, and they use mathematics that doesn't imply love, but our minds and essentially our bodies can.
And in trying to love others, we really gain ourselves. So it's a win-win situation.
I find young and old and in between really looking for a different vision to move to peace, love, and joy, or at least towards that direction from war, crime, and violence. A new way of understanding our wonderful connection with all of nature and how we experience that, not just as a piece of knowledge of physics, saying, well, I need to do this to survive, but in order to enhance our spiritual feelings and to find out that we really are in tune with God's creation and the existence.
I believe that many people have decided already whether or not participating in the changes.
The roads will split in humanity. There will be some who will hang on, like grim death, and others will say, I'm going with the earth. I'm going to follow the rhythm of the earth.
In conclusion, only one question remains. If we already suspect that our world is not what we believe it to be, that our consciousness is more than our brain, and that everything is connected to everything else, why should we wait for a cosmic event to bring us love and harmony? After all, right now, today, we all have not only the capacity but also the responsibility to change our world with our thoughts and our actions, each one of us, in every moment.
Yes.